Hello again YouTube and welcome back to Just Get a Tesla. Recently I test drove the Model 3 Highland, the facelifted, greatly improved car, and I was impressed. But am I impressed enough to want to chop in my Model Y for a Model 3? It isn't actually as daft a question as you might think. This is obviously a bigger car than the Model 3, but I was really impressed with just how much interior space there actually is in the 3, especially in the boot. I mean, if we actually go and have a look in my Model Y now, and try not to get the sun completely in the lens, but if we have a look, that is a big old space, and you've got bags of space under there to be able to put more stuff, and the seats fold down. Obviously, a hatchback is more practical than a saloon, surely, but when I looked at the Model 3, I found that the boot was absolutely cavernous. I used to have a 5 Series BMW and it was a similar kind of size, and of course you've still got the under floor bit. And then the one thing that you get with Tesla, which you don't get with compromised cars built on legacy platforms from other manufacturers, is a frunk. And that adds another usable chunk of space, which again, for me, I put my charging cables in there, and that's the place to hide them out of the way. So do I actually need all of this space on a daily basis? No, I don't. Sitting here in the back of my Model Y, surely it's obvious why I've got this car and not a Model 3, because there's absolutely bags and bags of space. I've actually got the seats reclined back as far as they go, and I really am quite a long way away from the seat in front. I've got acres and acres of leg room, and there's plenty of room underneath the seat to be able to get my big clod hopping boots under there. And you don't get that with a Model 3 because the whole thing is lower down. The seat base is a little bit lower, which means that there's a little bit less under thigh support. Your feet don't go quite underneath the seat the way they do in this. But if you're transporting kids, that really isn't gonna matter. And that, I think, is the important point here, that it depends on your use for the car. So let's just touch on why I got a Y instead of a 3 in the first place. And for me, this isn't just my car, and it's not just a family car, it's also a work vehicle. I use this to transport stuff quite often, and I have had this car packed literally up to the roof. And look, it's glass, it's fabulous, but I've had stuff literally piled all the way up to the top. I've had the front seat pushed as far forward as it'll go. Basically, I fill this vehicle up, not all the time, but I've certainly made use of the space. So if I had a Model 3, I would find its smaller packaging a compromise on those times where I actually need it. But for your uses, I've got to ask the question, what is it that you're actually looking for? Because I think the reason why a lot of people want a hatchback instead of a saloon is they think, well, it's easier and it's more practical and it's more flexible. That's probably true, but when the Model 3 boot is as big as it is, I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. And similarly, if you've got small kids, they're not going to care about the seat base being slightly lower down and there being a bit less room under the seats, because they're not getting their feet under it in the first place. If they're in child seats, there's plenty of room in the back to be able to do that as well. What really impressed me, though, about the Model 3 Highland was the new interior. So the Model Y and the Model 3 are very similar, slightly less wood trim on the doors on a Model 3, which of course has now all been replaced by this fabric thing. Personally, I don't think the wood looks particularly good. Anyway, if I went for the white interior, I know that that is a white surround instead, which I think reflects. I quite like black interiors in cars. Other people will disagree. But the interior of the car in the 3, the mood lighting effects from the LED strips really added something to it. It really did. And just the way that all of the materials were softer and squishier, and the fact that the ride was a little bit more subtle. Now, part of that is that the base Model 3 comes on 18-inch wheels, and this is the base Model Y on 19s. But that extra bit of sidewall and the better suspension play just meant that it is a more compliant car. It was better over bumps than this car is. And I don't have a problem with the suspension in this car, but it does get commented on quite a bit. Okay, the thing we should talk about really is cost. Because if you go onto the Tesla UK website and have a play with a configurator, essentially you've got two choices for both of the cars, which is the same. You can have a Model 3 rear-wheel drive only or a Model 3 all-wheel drive. You can have a Model Y rear-wheel drive only or an all-wheel drive. You also have a performance option on the Model Y. We're still awaiting for the new Model 3 performance / ludicrous / plaid, whatever it's going to be. When it comes, it's going to be a brute. But while we're waiting, you've effectively got those two choices. And let's just touch on what those are. You've got a smaller battery in the rear-wheel drive vehicles, and you have only got a rear motor instead of having dual motors. In the real world, Tesla put all kinds of claims on about how far the cars will go. And that isn't Tesla making things up. That is them using the WLTP test, which everybody does. In the real world, you're not going to get that. And I think it's important that we all accept that. You do not get WLTP. There are some times where I can drive this car and I'm basically getting very close to it. But that's not every trip. That's not in all conditions. But the reality for most people who are looking at getting an EV is the car charges while you're asleep. I'm literally standing where the car sits while I'm asleep, and it gets plugged into my wall. But let's get it so you can actually see the thing in the sun. Goodness me, the sun is absolutely glowing. But you've got my Homebox wall charger thing here. This will put 7.2 kilowatts into it. It charges up overnight, so every single day that I come out of the house, my car has got charge in it. Always be charging. But you tell me another kind of car where you wake up in the morning and the thing is been refueled for you overnight. That little charge box there is absolutely brilliant. And for most people, the slightly lower range you're going to get with the rear-wheel drive, smaller battery car is going to make no difference at all. The majority of journeys done in the UK in 2024 are comfortably inside the real world winter range of any of these cars. So for all of the FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt that you see on the internet and in right-wing newspapers and on, if you're really watching GB News, please stop. But, you know, GB News, The Sun, the Daily Mail, they all tell you about there's no range, your power's going to go flat, and then after the car's gone flat, you're going to burn alive. None of that's true. But for most people, you are not going to need to charge the thing up in public most of the time. So there's no real reason to get the all-wheel drive over the rear-wheel drive unless you really, really, really want a bit more range, all-wheel drive, and a better sound system. To be fair, the sound system on this is absolutely banging, and as I understand it, the rear-wheel drive cars are not quite as good. I was told that they had improved the stereo on the rear-wheel drive one, so it was the same as the all-wheel drive. They haven't quite, but it's not far off. So if we look at the price differences between a Model 3 and a Model Y, it's actually fairly close. So if I look at the long-range versions of the car, a Model 3 long range is £49,990. A Model Y long range is £52,990. So it's £3,000 difference to get a much bigger car with a bigger interior. But if you don't want those things and you don't need those things, don't spend the money. But from a pricing difference, it's actually not that dissimilar. Here's then the other thing that I've had a look at. I have gone into the system and looked at what this car is worth if I wanted to trade it in. So I've done my review of the Model 3 Highland, described it as the iPhone of EVs. It just works. I really, really, really like the new interior. And let's say I wanted to flip this in and get a Model 3 instead. Well, Tesla are offering me £37,100 for this car on 28 and a bit thousand miles. Now, the guaranteed future value on the finance deal that I took out when my company bought this car was £24,333 based on 60,000 miles and 4 years old. So it's 2.5 years old and it's done half the mileage and it's worth 37 grand versus 24 grand if we went another 18 months on and doubled the mileage. That tells you how much money you lose when you drive a car away from the showroom. And I get comments talking about devaluation and depreciation and how much money is being lost, but every car depreciates. That's just what they do. If you don't want to lose money on a car, lease it. Let's talk about leasing in a second. So having had a look, I think the trade-in value is fair. I have had a look at the amount of credit payments that I need to pay on the deal. And if you actually look at the current Part-X value versus the amount of money that I still need to pay on this car, it's just above it. So that's good. It's holding its value higher than was forecast when I took it out. Going and swapping onto a Model 3, for all the people who've got an older car, is probably a no-brainer. If you can get a decent trade-in, and Tesla do good trade-in prices, but if you can get a good trade-in and you want all of those new features, why wouldn't you? Especially if you've got an older Model 3, you know, going all the way back to when they first came into the UK with the older plasticier, yeah, that the word, interior, then the new car really will be a huge update. It's a bit like when people review the new iPhone and say, should you upgrade from last year's iPhone onto the new iPhone? And the answer is probably no. So if you're driving a Model 3 that's just gone out with the old design, but it's got the modern interior, there probably isn't a point in upgrading. But if you've got a much older one, yeah, I can understand that. But when I was having a look on the website, something jumped out at me. And this is almost certainly Tesla doing different pricing just to try and draw people in. So written down on the back of my little note, you can lease a Model Y rear wheel drive on a 9+23 lease deal. So you pay 9 months up front and then carry on for 23 months of payments to give you a 2-year lease, to do 10,000 miles a year, so 20,000 miles in total, and it's £399 a month. $399. That is stonking value. Absolutely stonking. I tried to come up with a Model 3 rear wheel drive quote to match it, and the shortest lease that I could find was a 9+35, so a 3-year lease. Again, 10,000 miles, again with similar size deposit, and that's £571 a month. A lot more. I mean, 180 quid more, which when the Model Y rear wheel drive is 400 quid a month, you know, it's another what, 40% on top to get the smaller car. And that's where you start thinking. Sometimes you do get your opinion swayed when there's a good deal. And despite me coming into doing the bit of research for shooting this video to say, just get a Model 3 Highland, it's absolutely fantastic, that's not actually what I'm saying now. The Model 3 Highland is fantastic. Genuinely beautiful looking car, fabulously built, extremely well equipped. It will be, for most people, that iPhone-like experience that I'm talking about. But when they're doing such a mega deal on this car, the Model Y, with all of this space, it's really hard to say anything else. $399 a month for a 2-year lease. I mean, come on. You're not worried about depreciation. You're not worried about battery degradation. You're not worried about all of the FUD that people post about EVs, because it won't be your car. You're leasing it. It's Tesla's car. Let them worry about it. And by the way, for all of the people who push all of the FUD, they're not worried because they know none of it's true. But you keep on posting and commenting and whatever else. It's absolutely fine. $399 a month for a car like this. no road tax, no maintenance. If you can charge the thing at home most of the time, and most people can, your running costs are going to be buttons. Have a look at your car now, petrol and diesel, how much money a month you're spending on fuel, and then look at what your electricity deal is and work out how much it would cost you in electricity. So of that $399 a month, how much of that are you saving in not buying fuel? So food for thought, guys. Let me know what you think. Are you swayed by these mega lease deals on the Model Y? It's the bigger car, but it's the older car. Or did you see my review and other people's reviews and what you've seen yourself of the new Model 3 Highland and gone, I've got to have one? And if you have, I understand. But if it was my money and it was my choice, I'd get a Model Y. I will tell you one thing though, before I go. When the Model Y refresh comes out, it's going to take a lot to dissuade me from trading this in for that, because I think that the quality and refinement improvements and the equipment improvement will be worth it. Let me know what you think. As always, like and subscribe to the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you back here very soon on Just Get a Tesla.